Hello students, welcome to the first session for 10th standard science dealing with the chapter, that is chapter number 8, how do organisms reproduce. Well, the name of the chapter has a question. So let us dissect the name of the chapter. Now if you observe the name of the chapter, that is how do organisms reproduce, has a major process, has a major life process, that is the reproduction. So what do we understand by the term reproduction? So basically it is a process by which the already existing organisms, they produce new organisms similar to themselves. Here I have used the word similar and not same. So the already existing organisms, they produce the organisms similar to themselves. And this process is said to be the reproduction. And this similarity is there in the form of the characteristics and various other aspects. So how the characteristics are basically transferred from one generation to the next. So that is exclusively transferred with the help of a genetic material that is said to be DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid. Now where this DNA is basically present? This DNA is exclusively present inside the nucleus of the cell. What this DNA is made up of? This DNA is made up of the proteins. And basically there are a lot of segments in the DNA. And this segment which the DNA is made up of, that is said to be the genes. So gene is a structural and functional unit of the DNA that is responsible for the transfer of the characteristics from one generation to the next. So if we want the good organism to be generated, then a good DNA is to be donated or it is to be transferred from one generation to the next. Now, when the organisms are created from one generation to the other generation, the organisms are not same. There are a lot of changes in them. And in the biological terms, we use the term that is the variations. And these variations are bound to take place because the mixing of the characteristics from the parents. So let us understand in much detail about the term reproduction, its various types, and the other major aspects of the reproduction in much detail of it.
Well, reproduction is a process through which an organism increases their number. So it is a process which also helps in maintaining the continuity of the species. It is applicable right from the unicellular organisms like the bacteria, amoebas, etc. up to the human beings also. So right from the smaller organisms to the larger ones. So it is inevitable, that is exclusively necessary as the living being does. So they grow and die. So it is a law of nature and a way to survive also. So let us go into the types of the reproduction. There are two basic types: the sexual reproduction and the asexual reproduction. So let us go into the crux of it. Now in the asexual reproduction, the participation of two organisms is not required. It occurs without involving the sex organs. So here only one organism is involved. In case of the sexual reproduction, an organism develops from the union of the two individuals, that is a male and a female. So let us proceed further into the various aspects of the asexual reproduction. Now there are various types of it. They are binary fission, multiple fission, budding, spore formation, regeneration, fragmentation, and vegetative propagation. The first one, that is the binary fission. It is a process where the two daughter organisms of equal size are formed from one parent. So First, the nuclear division, which is followed by the cytoplasmic division. It occurs only under the environmental conditions that are favorable. That is, there should be plenty of food, water, and suitable temperature for this process to basically take place. It takes place in algae, fungi, and numerous bacteria also. Now, amoeba is a lower unicellular organism which undergoes binary fission during favorable conditions only. So let us observe it the further, that is the multiple fission. Now in multiple fission, it occurs under unfavorable conditions such as the lack of water. And from the name itself, multiple, so many cells are formed. A thick wall is formed, also known as a cyst, around the amoeba. And when the cell splits many times within the cyst to form many small amoeba, and that is said to be multiple fission. Further, proceeding into the budding. In this type of reproduction, a new organism grows in to form a bud. So from the mother cell, a bud is being generated. And that bud later on grows to form an adult. Yeast cell has a nucleus and the cell contains abundant amount of the cytoplasm. And basically at the time of reproduction, the yeast cell sends out a small outgrowth from its cell, and that is said to be a bud. Then the nucleus of the parent yeast cell divides into two and one is sent into the bud. So first the cytoplasm divides and then the nucleus. Then gradually the bud separates from the parent cell and grows into a new cell of the yeast. So it detaches and grows as a new yeast organism. In case of the spore formation, the reproduction occurs in some plants which produce the tiny spherical cells known as the spores that grow into the new individuals. And these spores are so light that they can float through the air also. So they are spreaded out by means of the air. Mushroom, molds, ferns, the mosses, they reproduce by this method. In the mosses and the ferns, the spores are produced inside the special structures known as the capsules. And a thick wall enables the spores to withstand certain unfavorable conditions. Focusing into the regeneration. In this method, the parent body breaks into the pieces and each piece can grow into a new individual. Starfish, planaria, etc. are capable of undergoing regeneration. They regenerate the lost part. Just as in case of the Spirogyra, that is showing the fragmentation. One more type of asexual reproduction where it undergoes into certain parts, into small pieces upon maturation. And it forms the lost part of it. Focusing into the different types of the vegetative propagation. So a number of artificial methods are there which are used in the agriculture as well as in case of the horticulture. These artificial methods for the vegetative propagation are layering, then cutting, grafting, the tissue culture. These are the various methods. Let us observe one by one. In case of the layering, a lower branch of a plant is bent down very much close to the ground and it gets covered with the moist earth in such a way that its growing tip remains above the soil. And after a few days, the covered portion of the stem usually produces an adventitious roots. And the rooted branch is then cut and grown as an independent plant. This method is used to propagate the plants such as the jasmine as it occurs naturally in case of black raspberries. In case of the cutting, we have to select a healthy young branch with a few nodes and internodes. Then cut off the branch and remove most of the leaves. Now cut and is stuck into some good moist soil. Now looking at the cutting of it after a few days, we observe that there are certain roots have been developed in it. This method is used to propagate the plants like the roses, the sugarcanes and the pineapples. So from one plant we get multiple plants. In case of the grafting, it is an art of joining the parts of two plants, such as the way they grow as a one plant, and that is said to be the grafting. For doing it, we have to select a plant and then detach a twig or a bud from it, and this twig is said to be the scion. And the scion is then kept over the cut stem of another plant, and that is said to be the stalk, which has an extensive root system under the soil. Now the two cut surfaces are bound together and joint is covered with the wax to prevent the evaporation and also to stop the infection. And the tissue of the stalk and the scion, they join together and form one complete plant. So the fruit that will be developing, that will be having the characteristics of both of them, the stalk as well as the scion, for the desirable characteristics. For example, a high yield variety of a fruit is grafted to another of the same, known for its toughness. And then we get a tough, high yielding variety. So new varieties are being produced. Mango, rubber, apple, pear, citrus and guava are basically propagated through this method. They are generated by this method. Next method is the tissue culture method. It is a modern method of vegetative propagation. Let us understand the steps in much detail of it. For the tissue culture, first we cut a piece of the tissue from a desired plant and then keep it in a nutrient medium under controlled conditions. This tissue grows into a mass of cells, and this mass of cell is said to be the callus, and that is said to be the callus culture. Later on, the callus formed is transferred into a different medium which makes them develop into the new plantlets. So the cells are distributed in different locations. These plantlets are now grown into the pots of the soil, and the tissue culture is used in the propagation of orchids and the chrysanthemum also. Well, focusing into the natural vegetative propagation, these are the different parts of the plants like the roots, stems and the leaves and the buds are used. Just as in case of the rose plant, the sweet potato, the bryophyllum and the small buds also. They give rise to the new plants under favorable conditions. Let us go in much detail of it. In case of the vegetative propagation by stem, the underground stem that are modified for the storage of food has buds, and the new plants are developed from these buds. The modified stems like the tuber, bulb, rhizome and the corm help the plant to multiply. Just as in case of the tubers, in case of the potato. So potato is the best example of a tuber. the eyes of the buds present on the tuber, it develops into a new plant. The bulb is a modified shoot that has a very short stem and the apical and the axillary buds also. In these buds, they grow to form shoots. The best examples are the onion and the garlics. In a rhizome, the stem is thick, fleshy, that is full of food, and has a distinct nodes and internodes and the other axillary buds also. So small adjacent buds are there. And new branches that develop from these buds, which later on separate to form the new plants. Ginger, turmeric, and the lotuses are the typical examples of it. Now, corm is a condensed form of the rhizome and basically consists of a solid, fleshy underground stem bearing one or more buds. And from these buds, the new plantlet is basically generated. Some of these buds, they produce the daughter corms, which later on grow into the new plants. And colocasia is one of the best example of it. Vegetative propagation by roots. Now the roots also help in the vegetative propagation. The sweet potato and the dahlia, they give rise to the new plants from their fleshy roots. Fleshy means the full of food. By means of the leaves, the plants like the bryophyllum and the begnonia, the buds are produced on the leaf margins. So at the border of the leaf, small buds are there. These buds, after falling on the ground, they produce new plants.
So that was the entire thing in relation to the term reproduction, the types of reproduction, and the various types of the asexual reproduction in case of numerous organisms. Well, in the next class, we shall discuss in much detail about the other major aspects of this chapter. Thank you very much.